Hey, my name is Chuck. I'm a horror fan, and I'm here to talk about the new 4K release of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I've got a bunch of information here with some video clips and whatnot. This is the first time on a US video release that they've included the theatrical and uncut versions of the film. Now, as far as uncut goes, this appears to be footage that they had to cut to get an R rating in the US. I'm not sure if it was cut internationally or not, but as you're going to see, these trims are pretty minor. So what I've got is on this side of the screen, you're going to see the theatrical version. On this side, you're going to see the uncut version. I can't explain. It's difficult for me to justify the difference and why an extra second of little girls playing jump rope is something that I don't know what to say. All I can say is these are the differences between these two versions. I don't believe you should pick this up for the uncut version of the film because it's pretty minor, but you should get it for other reasons. Okay, now here is a section where I compare the mono mix, which is included on the new 4K release, albeit the audio level is mastered 5 decibels lower than it really should be. So if you switch back and forth, it may seem, oh, the stereo one seems better. Well, it's at a louder volume, but yeah. So what I have here are some before and afters where you can hear the original mono of a little segment, and then you'll hear the stereo remix. Now, for YouTube, I can't include the full Dolby Atmos 7.1 or whatever soundtrack. I have to matrix it down into a 2-channel Dolby Pro Logic 2 encoded version to compare these. The best way to listen to this, I believe, is with headphones on, or if you play it on your television, make sure that in the bottom, let's say it'd be in this corner, that you select the little sprocket and choose the highest quality. There is a 4K version of this video. I'd play it in that quality or at least 1080p to get the best picture and sound quality, at least a lot better than just watching on your phone. Please don't watch this video on your phone, even with headphones, unless you're just evaluating the sound. I attended a 40th anniversary screening of A Nightmare on Elm Street recently. It was on September 30th at the Aero Theater in Santa Monica. It was an event sponsored by the American Cinematheque. And Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy, Ronnie Blakely, who played her mother, Amanda Wiss, who played her friend Tina, were at this screening. And the ladies came out to speak after we had seen the film. And I had noticed when we were viewing it that the sound mix was different. Some of the problems I heard in the prior DVD and the only Blu-ray edition weren't completely in evidence. I was beginning to hear some sound effects and some music that was missing for a while, but it was often mixed very low, or just really kind of things were getting lost in this new remix, and not always, in the best way. Well, what's interesting is this moment from that reunion screening when Heather Langenkamp brings up Wes Craven's favorite line from the film, and it's one that Ronnie Blakely says. And Ronnie noticed that at the screening, not everything was coming through the way that she intended. Well, anyway, here is the clip, and then I put samples, before and after samples afterwards, comparing the original mono and the remix, which we viewed at the theater, but is what this new 4K disc defaults to.
Well, I have to say, I think one of Wes's favorite lines of the movie, when I would get together with him, he would always say, "Locked, locked, locked."
I do think I made up that line. Really? But you know, I noticed on the show tonight that my third locked seemed to be dropped. Locked, locked, cut.
It was soft. I noticed that several lines seem to kind of fade down too quickly. I don't know if it's the mixer. I noticed that.
Lock, 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 lock.
Now what I've got here are some samples between the original mono mix and a version of the stereo remix that is on the new 4K disc. And I believe that mix, the Dolby Atmos mix, is probably going to be the default option for any future theatrical bookings. If they send out a DCP, I'm sure that's the main audio track. I'm hoping they include the original mono, and that some venues may choose to play it with that audio option, because I think it's far superior. What I've got here are some examples from one mix, and the original mono mix, and then the remix that's on the Blu-ray. And I think well, actually I don't know what you'll think, but you'll be able to hear some big differences in mixing, balance, and honestly, I think some of the scares, the jump scares, work better in mono. So that's what I'm going to be demoing here, is showing a little bit from the original mono and then playing a little bit from a 2-channel version of the remix. The video on this is all from the new 4K, which has been converted from high dynamic range to standard dynamic range for this comparison. So you're not going to get whites as bright or blacks as black as you would see if you're viewing it in high dynamic, in HDR or Dolby Vision on a 4K television with a compatible player and disc. But you're going to get a close approximation, and the important things I want you to see, you'll be able to see in this demonstration. So here are some samples of the film with a clip with the original mono and then with the stereo remix. And make note, especially if you're wearing headphones, which is the best way to hear this and compare it, are the sound effects, the musical stings, and also the placement of the music. There are scenes where all of a sudden the music, like when Nancy is in the bathtub, is mixed so low, the music is, and yet the sound effects are very loud. And it just changes the entire mood of the scene, and honestly, I think the effectiveness of it. So here are the moments that I felt were the most egregious in the remix compared to the original mono.
its energy and it disappears.
But what happens if they don't do that?
Well, then I guess those people don't wake up to tell what happens.
What if they meet a monster in their dreams? Then what?
They turn their back on it. Take away its energy and it disappears.
But what happens if they don't do that?
Well, then I guess those people don't wake up to tell what happens.
Now this is a very small thing, but I believe that there is an error on the remix. It's during the scene with Nancy is calling Glenn shortly before he conks out and meets Freddie for the last time. There's one shot where on the stereo track, you can hear it through speakers and especially through headphones, there's a loud hiss on the left channel just for one shot. And it's not on the original mono, it's not on any of the prior mixes either. But for some reason, on one shot, there's this loud distracting hiss on the left channel, that's only on the stereo remix. And what I'm gonna do now is play that section from the original mono, and then I'm gonna play the stereo remix, and then you'll see a little moniker, a little text box, some text up here that points out the flaw in the new mix. It's very small and it's probably silly for me to mention it, but since I noticed it, it only made sense to put it here.
Hi, how you doing?
Stand by your window so I can see you. You stand a million miles away.
Hi, how you doing?
Stand by your window so I can see you. You stand a million miles away.
Now this, I think, is rather funny. There's a moment when Nancy is in the boiler room that you can see her mouth an obscenity, but you don't hear anything. The original mono, we never heard anything. On the first stereo remix, on the first DVD, there was nothing there. But then all of a sudden, with the stereo remix from the 2006 DVD and then the later Blu-ray, and now on this 4K release, I guess since they went back to the original dialogue, music and effects tracks or stems, with the remix, they brought up what was being said. So here's a before and after of something that we actually gained in the stereo remix. Okay, now we're going to compare some different versions of the films. Now I tried to use the exact frame if I could get it. Sometimes it's a few frames off, and I resized these images to fit as closely overlapping each other as I could. But I've got the 1996 Image Entertainment Laserdisc, which at the time was the best the film had ever looked or sounded. The 1998 or 99 DVD release, I think it was 98, which is the first time it had a 5.1 Dolby Digital remix released on video, and it had the original mono as well. Then I have after that, the Blu-ray that was released, I think around 2008, 2009, sometime in that time frame, using the master that was the same remix that was on the 2006 Infinifilm DVD release. And then I have comparisons from this new 4K release. And again, for it, I had to convert the high dynamic range HDR to standard dynamic range. And I used a program which tried to approximate the brightness, color, contrast as much as possible. But the biggest issue was to reveal the quality difference, the detail, the resolution difference between these different formats, from Laserdisc, which was better than VHS, but the difference is pretty minor compared to the leaps in quality we have now. So we go from Laserdisc to DVD to Blu-ray and then 4K. And what I noticed most was how the Blu-ray release has a lot of contrast boosting. Some of the highlights, facial highlights, highlights in fabric, with the contrast boosting, the detail has been bloomed out of the image. And you'll notice this in the comparison especially on Nancy's pink sweater, where there's some detail with the Laserdisc. There's a lot more with the DVD. All of a sudden with the Blu-ray, there's more, but there's also big patches of where the detail is gone in the lighter parts of the image. And then the 4K, which brings all of that back with the HDR pass, so there's no blooming. There's no black crush, and there's no blooming of the whites. Whereas there was on the prior Blu-ray release, which unfortunately is the one that's still available. I can't tell you how happy I am with the video quality on it. I think it's detailed. The framing is a little bit different. The prior DVD and Blu-ray shows a little bit more headroom, and I think it may have been framed improperly, a little bit too high up. Not a big difference. You'll see maybe some of it in the comparisons. I'm just overjoyed that, I mean, it gets very dark with the high dynamic range, but not so dark you can't see what's going on. Prior releases were honestly too bright in many ways. On the commentary track, on commentary track number 2, actually, producer Sarah Risher talks about going to a preview screening, and the projectionist, I don't think it was a preview screening, it was some other kind of screening, and there were complaints about how dark the image was. And she said that they had, timed the film to be fairly dark, but then she went to a screening and she just couldn't believe how dim it was. And she went up to the projection room and found that they were projecting it at like lower candlelight than what they should be, which I guess 35mm projectors and 70mm, I guess all of the professional ones, you get to choose just how bright the image is based on full power or less. And if you run it at less power, then the image isn't going to be as bright. And if you have a horror film that takes place at night, it's going to be a problem. Kind of reminds me of how with the new digital 3D, the image is dimmer, and then you put on the 3D glasses and it gets even dimmer. So usually a lot of 3D films are very bright to compensate for that. Well, you've got a horror film set at night, what are you going to do? Well, what they did in the initial release is Sarah Risher, the producer, said that they just brightened the prints a bit, because they figured that a lot of theater owners would be projecting it at half candlelight or some reduced setting, which is a problem. So if you're like, oh, we're seeing it in original 35mm print, well, you're seeing it too bright if it's projected properly. And, take that for what it's worth. Now, the commentary track, the first one, it's noted on the menu as being from 2001. It was recorded in 1995 for the 1996 Elite Entertainment Laserdisc release. Now, on the track, they mentioned the death of production designer Greg Fonseca, who had passed away in 1994. They said he passed away last year. What's great about the inclusion of this commentary track, not just for historical purposes, because Wes is no longer around and neither is John Saxon, even though he barely says anything on the track. What's great is on the original Laserdisc, it was in mono, because it was included on an analog track. And Analog 1, I believe, was the movie's mono soundtrack, and then Analog 2 was this commentary track. Well, what's great I'm not sure if it was, I didn't check the prior DVD or Blu-ray release to check this part of it, but that same commentary track, the first one, is in stereo on this 4K release. So it's almost like you're in the room with them, because from the left to the right, you've got these 4 participants spaced out, which I thought was great. So there's an advantage. 49 minutes and 22 seconds, approximately, into the commentary track, Wes Craven even mentions, actually it's Jack Haitkin, the director of photography, mentions how clean the image is on what they're watching. And Wes mentions, oh, but this is just a VHS tape. The Laserdisc will be much better. So it's obvious they're watching some VHS dub of this new master that was on the Laserdisc at the time. And they all mention how bright and how beautiful it is. And at the time it was. At the time it was the best technology we had. And now we've gone far beyond that. Sometimes the advances in technology are good. Actually, they always should be. But if not monitored, if the quality control isn't there, if the attention isn't paid, things can turn out different than maybe what was intended. And also, there are times when mistakes are made or mixing decisions are made that a lot of people may not agree with. There are people that may love the Dolby Atmos mix that is on this disc. I personally like a few scenes in it. I'd just be a lot happier if there were some changes made in the mix, because there are moments where the impact is just gone. And I think that's unfortunate. Another odd thing about this disc is that no matter what track you're listening to, if it's the mono, one of the commentary tracks, a foreign language track, at least on my Sony 4K player, whenever I would stop it, or when the player would go to sleep if it was on pause and I would resume it from the menus, it would resume to the same place in the film, but it always defaulted back to track 1, the Dolby Atmos stereo remix. Don't know why, just wanted to let you know that. So if you happen to be watching the original mono and then you stop the film and come back to it and resume it, check and see that it didn't default back to the stereo instead of going back to the mono. It's odd. I've not noticed that on any other discs, so I think it was odd that this was programmed to default back to the stereo track no matter what other track was selected if you stop and resume the disc. I mean, the film could be put in stereo with all the sound effects and all the music cues and still be very effective. It's just, I don't think that that's what we got with the Dolby Atmos remix that's on this disc. I think it's superior to the stereo remix that is on the Blu-ray that's still available and the prior DVD, but I still think the original mono that's included, if you turn it up a bit, is actually far more effective. Again, the main point of this new release is getting it in 4K with a beautiful image harvest and grade from what appears to be the original camera negative, and the original mono is included, a lot of great bonus features. I'm pretty happy with it. Again, I don't care for the stereo remix. I think it's better than it was, the previous remix, but this Dolby Atmos didn't really do it for me, but the original mono, when you turn it up, does. Whether you select the theatrical version or the uncut version, you're really essentially getting the same film. And I don't know. Those are my thoughts. So, I mean, I loved being able to see more detail in the actor's eyes than I'd seen before. There's a scene where Nancy runs outside of school after she has a nightmare in English class. And this was the first time I saw tears, whereas before I didn't see them. Not that, I mean, I still enjoyed the film, but there are little things like that, little details in fabric, little bits of color that are coming out in places that before the resolution and detail wasn't there, so you didn't see it. And I don't know, I'm very, very happy with this release. And again, I recommend it, but I recommend this release, but if you're going to play it with the original mono track.